Welcome to The Complete Musician, creativity at its core, exploring innovative musical ideas, thoughts, and techniques for the modern musician in today's society, with your hosts James Nagus and Drew Phillips.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Complete Musician Podcast. This is episode 11. I'm James.
And I'm Drew.
And we are back today talking about aural skills, which is everyone's favorite thing to talk about. But honestly, it's one of the arms of music, specifically music theory, that is a really important part of being a complete musician. And one of the main reasons that we thought we'd talk about it is, well, first of all, we both teach aural skills classes in college, and I'm guessing that many of you out there who are listening have also taken aural skills in some form, either in high school, college, or maybe you even teach it yourself.
Or you've seen The Sound of Music and listened to the song.
Yes.
A deer, a female deer.
And you practiced solfege before you even knew what that word was. So we've all have experience with aural skills, but I guess we should ask ourselves, why are they important? Why do we do it? Do we do it just because we have to? Is it, because we're horn players that people tell us we need aural skills more? Why is that? Well, the first thing for me, I think it's important is because we do a lot of audiation in music, which is essentially hearing a pitch before we play it. And especially as brass players, where we have several notes per fingering, having a better sense of the pitch we're aiming for will give us better success in general across the board. And that kind of goes into the whole adage of, if you can sing it, you can play it. And, well, I think there's validity in there. The better thing is if you can hear it, you can play it. So we're just going to talk about some exercises that we use, aural skills based, in either private lesson settings or large group settings, and maybe give you some ideas of things you can do with your students. The first kind of fun exercise I want to talk about is a very simple call and response, which we typically know as I do something, now you do something, which is
monkey see,
something
monkey do.
Yeah, and
more like monkey hear, monkey do.
Exactly. And this is a thing that you can do with students of all ages, but I think it's really important, especially with younger students as they're developing their ear. And you can do this as simple as, for example, overtone series call and response. Using let's just take F horn, C, E, and G, overtone 4, 5, and 6. I might go, do, mi, do, and then they play that back. And you can make up any kind of pattern.
Do.
Yeah, that was very good. Your tone was a little thin, so you might want to open up a little bit. But
okay.
Otherwise, it was good. And you can do any kind of chromatic alterations there. You can do scalar type exercises. Really, the sky's the limit. And you also don't have to do short little excerpts. You can do longer ones that kind of turn it more into a memory game. But if you're working for more on just the aural aspect, I think keeping it shorter and just doing a lot of them is effective. Do you do any of those kinds of exercises with your students?
Most of exactly what you just said, especially with younger kids. I do exercises on overtone series pitches, just like you were saying, just around usually the tonic triad at first. Especially with younger kids, it's just about matching, a response, matching tone as best as they possibly can, and trying to be as flexible up and down as possible and as smooth as possible in connecting the pitches. Even within the first 3 notes of open F horn on C, E, and G, which should be accessible to most beginners, it's a pretty good range for them to start in. You can add in all sorts of things. Like you can add in articulation, you can add in little fun rhythms and turn it into rhythm games. Like you said, the sky's the limit. One of the things I do want to say about when I start kids is I do usually start, instead of kind of making a guessing game at first, I think an important step is making sure that you always start on a consistent pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Like
usually the
starting
tonic or something.
Starting on do, almost every time, at least for, the first couple exercises every time that I do it. I know when I teach aural skills, I do the same thing on the piano, of course. And with my beginning aural skills classes, I do a lot of tonic triad stuff because at least in the first semester of aural skills in college, I think the whole purpose is to be able to find where a tonic triad is given a tonic, like being able to find do and sol from there, just from giving do. So I do a lot of those games too. But yeah, I think it's really important. At first, I usually just start exercises purely on do immediately because it helps root that in their mind. And it also gives them a good place to start with from at first.
Well, I think you also bring up two good points. And the first one is that anytime you can make something into a game, it's essentially disguising working on technique, but in a fun way, in an engaging way, in something that's a lot more, especially younger students will be receptive to doing. And it's kind of like, I don't know, wrapping up medicine in a dessert,
It's like a spoonful of sugar.
A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. The medicine go down.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. And the second point that you brought up was in doing these kinds of exercises, I think it's also very important to think progressively and logically and in small steps. As our teacher, Jeff Aural, would use the analogy, you don't want to, add too many spiders, alien mutant spiders at once. And that makes no sense to you.
Horrible analogy.
You can go check out his book, Horn Technique, to figure out what that actually means. Yeah. But yeah, spiders.
Games are a great idea, and one of the games that I'll even mention really quickly that I play with my aural skills kids is a game I stole from my wife, and she used it with her middle school band students, and she called it Master Grasshopper. And I stand up at the piano, and I usually establish 5 notes or something, just usually in C, because not everyone has great piano skill, but this is a great way to work on that. And I play a pattern. Someone has to solfege it back to me, and then we switch places on the way that we go, because at the piano I'm the master and they sitting in the class are grasshoppers, just to be funny. And then when we switch places, then we bow to each other and say sensei, just because it's fun. And let me tell you, college kids, they get into it, and little kids get into it too, but college kids love being a little bit silly. So anyway, but that's a great way to do. No, music is not fun. Unless you're Jeff Aural, then everything is fun, and everything is a game. And this is a great game, I think, that I use also with my horn kids, is that, and now granted we don't have the, large ensemble way to switch places, but in private lessons, we take turns making things up. And, it's great to be able to practice that skill of not only being able to practice technique, like you said, but also it's a little bit of improv too. Ooh.
Now, you mentioned large ensembles, and I think something like call and response can be used very effectively in a large ensemble. And I think you use that with it's your warm-up class? Is that correct?
Yeah, my warm-up class of both trumpet and horn, we do call and response, in which I play something and then the entire group has to play it back, and we try to go maybe even a couple times until everyone gets it correct, but we definitely identify the intervals that we've played after we've done it, so that those familiar intervals will, if they appear again in music, then we've already kind of rehearsed them. But yeah, we go around in a circle, and we've done that before, and it's been not only a good warm-up, not only good ear training, but also practicing their technique of, if we're skipping partial slurring and connection, if anyone has articulation, of tonguing without the distraction of, okay, I'm focusing on slurring, I'm focusing on tonguing, I'm focusing on the specific technique. The distraction of, let me just repeat these pitches back to you, is a great way to practice without thinking about it.
Now, one thing that we've touched a little bit on so far, but we haven't called it out directly, is the use of solfege, which are, of course, the syllables to go with pitch, that denote pitch.
Right now, what we say is, in the scale, I'm singing, since it's, December, do, re, mi, fa, so done with this semester.
If there'd be a do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ho, 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 but that doesn't even work because there's no ho, ho syllable. So.
Oh, you can invent one.
Yeah,
Let's say
that'll be
ho instead of
that'll
do.
be H. Well, there is H. H is like
Ooh.
an actual note that kind of exists on the musical
It's true.
plane.
The German, yeah, we could
So
say
that's,
that.
That's the ho syllable.
Ho,
So
re,
ho,
mi.
ho, ho.
Ho, re, mi. Okay, anyway.
So in aural skills classes in college, you use solfege all the time for singing. Now, as an instrumentalist, you're playing, so you can't be simultaneously also singing solfege unless you're really talented. But there are ways to incorporate solfege, and I think one that we were talking about not too long ago was where one person would sing a solfege pattern, and then the other person would play that back, but on their instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do any other variations on that kind of thing, or incorporating solfege either in your warm-up class or in just a private lesson setting?
In my aural skills classes, that's a lot of what I do. Is that I teach my aural classes hand signs right at the beginning of the semester. And so I use a lot of that in which I show a hand sign and they have to sing whatever I show. That's great for putting a physical kind of thing with what they're singing, especially vocalists who don't always have that kind of thing like instrumentalists do with the buttons that we push, or strings you press down, or keys, or whatever you do, or things that you hit, whatever. So the vocalist having those hand signs is really useful, and a lot of my kids continue to do that. But yeah, a lot of those things that you were just saying, I do with my ear training classes. I'll tell you one particular application of solfege that I find useful, and that's in sight reading with my kids.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was even doing it the other day. Is we're sight reading with a student, and we were not only sight reading, but we were transposing at the same time. And this was with a trumpet player who she hasn't really transposed much before, but we were transposing from her B flat into C trumpet. And I mean, they have to do that sometimes if they don't have a C trumpet. Mm-hmm. And so we were looking at this very, very simple exercise. It may have even been out of Getchell or something, like the first Getchell book. And just looking at it, since they're written in C for a while, thank goodness, I'm like, all right, so this first measure, tell me the solfege of this measure's written in C. And, you know, she goes do, re, mi, fa, sol. And I'm like, great. Now, you're playing in C trumpet, so you go up a step. What's our new key? D. Okay. In D, tell me the note names of what do, re, mi, fa, sol are. And from there, she figured out, you know, she could easily apply it while looking at that. So it's like, it's that transfer of knowing what the solfege is in the key and then applying it to the key you're going to. Mm-hmm. It also helped me when you're doing like triads or chords, because some of those Getchells, the first one, extrapolate on all sorts of chords, like 1 chords, 4 chords, 5 chords. And when you think of that solfege, you can apply it to the key that you're given.
Now, that's definitely a fantastic application of movable do. There are some solfege purists who say fixed do is the way to go and la bass minor, but especially for transposing
but none of us live in
instruments-
Boston.
Especially for transposing instruments, movable do is a lot more, I think, functionally useful.
Unpopular opinion, I do too. But if you want to argue with me, just email us.
Just put a comment down below. We'd love to hear from you and your fixed do.
And you're wrong,
thoughts.
sis. I mean, you're yes.
So, okay, well, I think this is a perfect opportunity here to hear from our unofficial sponsor for this week. So, check it out.
When you go on vacation, the last thing you want to worry about is your car, especially your luxurious Hyundai Sonata.
That's where we come in. Here at Sonata Daycare Center, we... not again.
Okay, here's little Charlie. Make sure he doesn't eat nuts or plastic or Hot Wheels cars or dirt and he's allergic to...
Susan, listen to me. We are Sonata Daycare Center. You get it? So, not the daycare center. For cars, not toddlers. Ugh.
Hey, I'm here to pick up my... Where are all these smelly kids here?
We are so sorry, sir. We'll be able to help you in just a minute. So, anyway...
Here at Sonata Daycare Center, we treat your car with extra special love and care. We offer...
Here's Billy for his tuba lesson.
No, Carol, no. We are Sonata Daycare Center, not Sonata Daycare Center. Anyway, we offer free waxing, oil changes, state inspections, headlight fluid replacement.
I like Batman and I want to pat him.
Get out of here, you little brat! Ugh. Sorry, folks. Okay, so some more things that we offer.
Can I finally get some service?
Sorry, sir. Sorry. Okay, we'll make sure you fill out our form with the correct exposition and double theme and development. Tyler, get off of the dominant. You can't stay there forever.
Anyway, so to recap, here it's not a... No! Put that down!
Sonata Daycare Center does not exist and never has existed and seems to have burned down anyway, so it won't ever exist, and no children, Hyundai Sonatas, or musical forms were harmed in the filming of this advertisement because all of this is fictional and ridiculous, because who would mistake a car center for a daycare, and why would you take your car to a daycare anyway? Would you walk to work? Would you bike to work? Would you take a blimp to work? Call a ride of the Valkyrie taxi to work? That's just silly, so this is completely absurd, and Sonata Daycare Center is not an official sponsor of the Complete Musician Podcast. And we're back. So we're going to continue our oral skills talk with talking about singing. Hooray! Which is something
I am no good at singing. Ugh.
Yeah, well, I do not have a good singing voice, just like I have a face for radio. I have a voice for not singing. So, but it's useful, especially in lesson settings, and as much as my students, and probably every student, and myself included, don't like singing, at least initially, the application of the oral aspects of singing are extremely useful, especially for just identifying intervals. And, a perfect example that I use in lessons to reinforce their audiation is, say there's a large leap they're working on, or just something that's a little more unusual, like a tritone. We'll get to the end of the phrase, and then I'll say, okay, I want you to keep that pitch in your head, and I want you to sing the next note. And that's very illuminating. Similarly, if there's any kind of scalar run, or really anything, if the student keeps missing an interval, it's probably because they're hearing it incorrectly, and they've just, for whatever reason, either practiced it that way, or there's a number of reasons. But essentially, if you can get them to sing back the correct intervals, then it's almost 9.9 times out of 10, they'll be a lot more accurate.
I think that's the entire crux of our oral skills training, is to see and reproduce with our voice. I mean, I've never had an oral skills class. I know some may do this. I've never tried it, but try and play like the melodies and things that you have, or the rhythms you have to do on your own instrument. I think we all have had to use our voices at some point, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you don't get to use... I never got to use my horn in oral skills classes. I'd have probably been even worse, but I just... or it had probably gone much harder than using my voice. But anyway, surprisingly enough. But yeah, I think that's exactly what we do, is being able to see that and reproduce it, and why some people find... the bane of their existence in music school to be musicianship and oral skills, is because they see these things and they have to reproduce exactly. And I try to imprint upon students how important and how crucial that is to their own practice and their own, their own preparation of repertoire that they have to play and they'll have to perform. Because it's exactly what you're saying, that the reason there's so much of what we do in our lessons is identifying the things that they're doing incorrectly. I mean, that's kind of the purpose of it, but so much of it can be solved away from the instrument. So much of it can be solved with you using your ears and you using the relationships that you build in those kind of classes, and with this oral training to reproduce what you see. And yeah, I spend so many of my lessons saying, okay, these pitches have been missed very consistently, whether it's something easy or hard. Sing it for me. Just sing it how it goes. Sing it on la. I don't care what scale degrees or solfege, or if you say cow, grass, or poop. I don't care what you say. Sing it for me.
Right.
And most of the time, their singing is very inaccurate. And I'm like, well, this is why we're missing it, is because we're not even able to hear it or get it out in our head. So there's no way you're going to produce it on the instrument. This like cold hunk of metal is not going to help you. It's going to fight against you because you're not even sure or being confident about what you're doing in the instrument.
Or rather, they're being accurate, but in the version that they hear in their head, which may not be the version on the page.
Right. And so it's important that the preparation is done for all of this, in that not only listening but working it out on their own. Whether, I know in aural skills, what I like to do when it comes to things like leaps you were just talking about is putting all the notes in. Like if you have a leap of a fifth or something and you're consistently missing it, singing up the scale or from wherever you start up that fifth, and then gradually eliminating notes from that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so then even doing the same on your instrument, like for us, like putting the notes in between those two notes that you're finding, that aural skill, and gradually eliminating, just that skill of being able to hear it and finding the correct pitches first is crucial to be able to singing it accurately to reproducing.
Right. And one thing, too, that I want to talk about, it's not necessarily like a devil's advocate thing, but it's something that is kind of a danger a little bit with this really audiation rote kind of approach. Is I know a lot of students that can really only learn after they've heard it played. And that's a dangerous position to be in. If you only have to have it played for you or hear a recording in order to understand it, that's kind of the whole point of, I think what we're really talking about is training the audiation ability, which is the in-your-head ability to hear it accurately.
Yeah, I've had those moments with those students who I say, this is how this should go, and I sing it to them or something, and that's when they get it. Or I say, this isn't accurate, and they say something just like you're saying about, hey, can you play it for me? And I'm like, absolutely not. I'm not playing this for you. You can figure this out on your own, and I'll walk you through the steps to get there so that you can do it on your own the next time you see something that you can't do.
And that's the important thing as teachers, to not just give the answer, but to give the strategies and have them come to the solution, have the student figure out the solution, right? But guiding them in the ways to do that.
Yeah, so they can use it in the future.
Right. Okay, so I think the final little section I want to talk about is any other little fun ear training games that we use. And the two that I'll start with that I like to use, one is called Telephone, which is kind of a game that I'm sure many of us have played, usually in the form of sentences and words, where you start with a word, then you add another, or just if you have a single word or phrase and it kind of makes its way through a lot of people and transforms.
where you say like the first person says like Susie went to the museum, and it turns into Paul ended up in the funeral home, and you're
right.
Like, how did we get there?
And so the goal would be that the sentence would be the same as when it started if you weren't going for comedic effect. But if you're going for a theory approach, a way that you can do telephone is kind of more an additive, and maybe there's a better name for that game, but essentially, like, let's say, okay, we're going to do C major, we're going to start on tonic, so first person plays a C, then second person plays that first note and adds a note of their choice, third person plays the first two notes, adds a note of their choice, etc., etc. So it's
Simon with notes.
Yeah, it's a combination of telephone and memory game, I think, a little bit. So, because, I mean, there's a certain point, too, where we, as humans, we can't actually remember enough information short term. So there really usually is a limit. But then the fun discussion you can have there is, okay, so let's look for patterns. Instead of remembering C, E, G, which is 3 bits of data, I'm thinking of a C major triad. That's one thing. And so if you can group those types of things, that's even more theory in one little game.
And I think that's helpful to skills of not only technique and ear training, but also sight reading. Because if you can look ahead on sight reading, that skill of being able to look ahead to what's coming, and you see that you already see, a chord that's coming up that's spelled out in notes, like an arpeggio or some kind of familiar pitch pattern, you don't have to waste time focusing on that and can look ahead. So it's like the same thing orally. It helps your music reading skills as well.
And the second game I want to talk about is called King of the Hill. And this is a really fun one. It can be for any number of players, but we'll just say, for example, 5 players. And they're in a line.
And you knock each other down off of a hill. Perfect.
Right. And you dent up your instruments. And there is a king, but also a queen. There's 5 people. Each person is assigned a note or a pitch. So, for example, again, let's just take C major. Let's do C, D, E, F, and G. Now, those are close together, so that's maybe more advanced. You could separate it. You could do C, E, G, and C if you had four people. But anyway, it starts, one person is designated the king on either end, and they play their note, and then they play someone else's note. So, for example, it could start G, so then plays G followed by D. The person who has the note D has to listen for their note. They play that, and then they play the note of someone else. Then that person has to listen for their note. So essentially, every time, every person has to both keep the sense of tonic in their mind, their pitch, and be cognizant of what scale or mode they're in, so what notes they have to choose from. And it can start without a sense of time. It can be like, okay, think about the pitch. Whenever you're sure, go. If you make a mistake, though, you have to go to the bottom of the line, and the goal is to be the king at the end of the round, which can be determined just however long you want to go. And then it can get kind of crazy if you start incorporating tempo, so that it has to go like bum, 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 beam, beam, bum, bum, and you can keep speeding it up. And either I've had experiences where the students are terrified and hate it, or because it can be a little stressful. But if you set it up as just being goofy and fun, then oftentimes they love it. And with instruments, it's a little easier, like all horns or something. Singing, you can do it if they're confident in solfege, but that gets a little more scary, I think.
Yeah. I've got one more game to add that's like super advanced, crazy fun. I'm pretty sure at some point during grad school you and I did this. If not, I've definitely done it with other people. But if you really want to test your students, or you want to test yourself with another person, you have a pal that you want to test some ear training with, what I've done before, at least in undergrad I did, and like I said, I'm pretty sure you and I may have done this at some point, is sit back to back, and then one person plays a note and the other person tries to play the exact same note.
Oh, just out of the blue?
Just out of the blue, like not saying a key, saying nothing, just like what it feels and what it sounds like. It's almost like you're trying to develop like perfect pitch, almost, because you're using your relative pitch of not even, the tone and what it like feels like almost. Because I think when we listen to things, we can mostly get within, I would say, like a third at least of where pitches are based on something that we're listening to, at least in what range, just because we've heard a lot of horn music. And so, and we know kind of what the sound of the instrument is. So that could be a really great way to get people to identify that, or your students to identify, being accurate is like kind of, again, creating that sense of aural recognition of the note, and then trying to match it almost physically with what it feels like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great exercise. It seems like it's a combination.
It's really hard.
Relative pitch and muscle memory.
I think that's a really great exercise. It's hard, but getting students to get within like, trying to get them within like a third or something. I mean, in a second or a third of any of these given notes, I think is a great thing.
Okay, so since aural skills is our topic for today, we have a real treat for you, and that is a guest. Now, back in October, Drew, when you were visiting, we had a very special guest at the same time that you were visiting. It was a very horn-filled week at the University of Central Missouri, and that is Natalie Douglass. Now, Dr. Natalie Douglass is the assistant professor of horn at Utah Valley University. She has taught, performed, and researched internationally, including a U.S. Fulbright to the Kodai Institute. And her primary area of research is the development of pedagogical approaches to connect aural skills training to brass instruction. And we got a chance to sit down with Natalie and ask her some questions and talk about her thoughts on aural skills in this, which is our second installment of Creative Colleagues.
All right, so now in our next segment on this podcast, we have the wonderful and fabulous Dr. Natalie Douglass here with us.
Hi!
Oh
my God!
so we're really excited to have her here. And so, Natalie, for our topic today of ear training in the horn studio, we want you to talk for only 5 minutes about how you use ear training in your horn studio teaching and private lessons.
And
go.
So that's it. I'm just supposed to. Okay, all right. Here we go. Ear training in the studio. Ear training is the fundamental part of everything that we do as horn players. So I really embed it, honestly, into the repertoire, but on some level I'm also working on it independently. So for instance, a lot of my students are still, they're trying to pass a sophomore review, so they're learning their scales. But I'm a very firm believer that really knowing a key is not just being able to play 2 octaves, know the fingerings, what have you, but to also be able to improvise in that key. Now, I'm not like an improviser per se, but I do ask my students, like I'll write out a chord progression in solfege. And I actually did that this morning visiting Central Missouri, where I'll write the solfege syllables out for like a 1-4-5-1 progression. And I'll have them sing and finger that chord progression, and then play like an improvisation, just doing 1 note per every chord in the given key that they're working on that week. So they have to play it, of course, 2 octaves, but then also be able to just do a very basic improvisation, and I'll sit at the piano for that. But then if they're also learning horn repertoire, I'll make them do things like, of course, sing it on solfege, depending on it. I'm not going to make them do that for Hindemith. I also not that cruel. Although I will make them do things that are less tonal on like a neutral syllable, like Lu. And I'll have them like practice audiating as well, where like they'll start singing something and then I'll ask them like, okay, measures 2 and 4, I just want you to hear it in your head, and then resume singing on measure 4. Can you come in on the next note if that note is mi? Can you hear that before you enter? Really, honestly, everything that we do is guided by our aural concept. What we hear is what we buzz into the mouthpiece, is what comes out of the bell. So I'm always thinking about incorporating that on some level into what I'm doing.
Wow, well, in 2 minutes and 13 seconds, you summed up aural training in the private studio. If you can bottle that, you'll be a millionaire.
Yeah, right. Hooray.
Yay.
I didn't even get the chance to have the duck sound go off.
I can say more.
There we go. No, I thought that was fantastic. Thank you
That
so
is
much.
fantastic. That
Especially because we
very
just
informative.
literally stuck a microphone in your face
And gave you
said
no
go.
prep time at all.
You said you had questions.
Oh, yes. Okay, so the next part of this interview is very important and very serious.
Oh, I thought I had to do all of it in 5 minutes.
Oh, no. No. This is very important. These are rapid fire questions in which you have no time to think about the answer. You must spit out the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay. Oh, God.
So there are 10 of these. Okay. We're
Are
gonna
these
start pretty
solfege
easy.
related or like life?
You'll see. So we're gonna start with 1. Remember, first thing that comes to your mind.
Oh
you
my
have
God.
To answer
Oh my
immediately.
God. Ah!
Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you ready? Here we
Ah!
go. Here we go. Describe yourself in 3 words.
Fun, energetic, musical.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
What would you name your boat if you had one?
The Barbie?
If you were given a minute advertisement in the Super Bowl, what would you advertise?
I would advertise Chipotle. Everybody knows I love Chipotle. Okay.
If a jogger runs at the speed of sound, can they still hear their iPod?
No.
What household chore do you hate the most?
I actually like chores. You don't have to think so much. Vacuuming.
What modern convenience do you think is a total waste of time?
Modern convenience. How about podcasts? Ha ha ha! I'm just joking. I love them.
Oh.
Okay, a penguin walks into this room wearing a sombrero. What is his name? Why is he here? And what does he say?
His name is Pepe, and he's cousins with Happy Feet, the penguin, and so he's here to dance. I'm here to dance, is what he says.
If you weren't a musician, what else would you do?
I would probably moonlight as a solfeging chorus girl.
On a scale of 5 stars out of 5 stars, how would you rate this podcast?
11.
Woo!
Yay!
Yay!
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
And that's going to just about do it for this episode of the Complete Musician podcast. As always, we want to thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write to us at coremotohorn@gmail.com or just leave a comment in the comment section below.
And remember, Rome wasn't built in a day, but 4-part dictation is impossible.